Hello, you're watching Pennyhill Junction, and this is part 2 of episode 4 of the How I Do series on track laying. So at the end of part 1, I just completed these 2 point sections in front of you. The first 2 points on the second loop, and now I'm going to start laying the Flexi track. And the first piece will be to fill that gap there before we continue on around the curve into the station area. So because this is a short section of track, approximately half the length of a 1 yard Flexi track, so obviously requires a little bit of track cutting. Now many of you would probably prefer to use a Dremel, and I think my advice would be to use a Dremel. I think it's a far more superior and convenient tool for track cutting. Unfortunately, I don't have one, so I have to make do with the Soldering rail cutters. However, I say this is a fantastic tool and does the job very well. So I'm just going to talk you through the process now of just getting this particular track cut to size before we lay it into position. Okay, so I've got a close-up now of where the concrete Flexi track meets the transition track. As you can see, I've left a 1 to 2 mil gap, which will replicate the gap I'll leave there for expansion. So I'm sure most of you are familiar that particularly in a loft layout like I have here, even in a UK summer, it can get pretty hot up here, and the high temperatures can cause expansion of the rails, just like on the railway. So it's always a very strong suggestion to leave a little bit of a gap to allow for expansion and contraction in the various conditions that we have here up in the loft. So I have the track temporarily laid in place. You see it's running over the point there, but the rails are in line. So the next job for me is to mark out. So I just use my craft knife and I simply mark out the end position of the point. Again, just going back maybe a millimetre or two to ensure that there's sufficient gap. And then I just score the top of the rail. That's both rails scored. You may be able to make out, again probably not in this light, but just there's a couple of very fine score marks which give me a guide of where I need to cut. Okay, so I've removed a couple of the sleepers, so that now gives me enough clearance to get in and cut the rail. Just using a bit of sandpaper just to file down any sharp edges caused by the cut. Okay, so I've laid the track down back into position now, and if we go in close up there, you can see it's a nice gap to allow for expansion. So now the next job for me to do in preparation for soldering the droppers. So as you can see, there's the droppers there on the outside loop, so I want to run them pretty much in line. So once I get the track into position there, just using a felt pen. Leave a mark on each side, and then a further mark on the outside, which will be the position that I'll drill the hole. So just like we did with the points and the power feed wires, the dropper holes, using a 2.5mm drill bit. That'll be sufficient enough to feed through the dropper wires. Okay, so you now join me over at my solder station. So I've just kept a finger on the position between the sleepers where the droppers will be soldered. As you'll know from my previous updates, that I now solder my dropper wires to the bottom of the rail as opposed to the sides. So in order to get enough access and enough rail to solder the droppers to, I just need to cut away any excess webbing. So as you can see there, I've cleared the webbing, so it gives me plenty of clearance there to solder the droppers in place. Okay, so before I solder the droppers to the bottom of the rail, of course, as always, I just need to tin the ends. Okay, and I'll go and do that now on the other wire. Right, so both the wires are now ready. You'll see as well that I've made a small 90-degree bend on the end of each wire. That's where it will attach to the rail, to the bottom of the rail. So the final thing for me to do here before I solder to the rail is I always just lightly score the bottom of the rail, just to take off that smooth surface, that shine, and help for a firmer hold of the solder and a stronger join. So I'm just going to drop this soldering iron onto the rail for a few seconds just to get some heat. And put a drop of solder on each rail. And obviously remembering that the way I'm soldering at the bottom of the track is the opposite to how it will sit on the layout. There we go. Job done. As easy as that. As you can see there, that's both droppers now soldered to the bottom of the rail. Okay, so I'm now ready to lay this first section of Flexi track. So you'll see there that I have the dropper wires fed through. I've checked that the piece of track fits in with the appropriate gap. I've also put rail joiners at each end. These are obviously the conductive ones. So what I'll do now is I'll just leave that to one side while I put the glue down. So the glue I'm using is just some general weatherproof wood adhesive. Some people also use Copydex, not just underneath the cork but also the track as well. However, I got a tip from Tim from the Scrapline Model Railway, who suggested I use this wood adhesive. Now I used it with great success on the first loop. The only thing that I did notice, I don't know if you can make it out on camera here, is on the side of the rails there's quite a dark tone which has appeared as a result of what I believe might be some sort of reaction from the glue to perhaps either the wood that was sitting on the top weighted down, or it might have had something to do with the very cold conditions up here when I laid the first loop. So at the time of recording this video, conditions are much milder. Yeah, we're into double figures up here in the loft, so it'll be interesting to see whether we have a similar reaction with the glue this time around. Okay, so I'm just going to start running a line of glue on the outside of the cork, then a line down the middle, and again down the other edge. And then all I do just using a paintbrush, just evenly spread the glue. So it's distributed right across the cork bed. Like so. So now I can just lay the track straight on top. Just using some set of grips, just ensure that the rail joiners are moved across onto the transition track, and then the same at the other end to connect to the point. Okay, so now that the track is in place, just have to go over and maybe adjust one or two sleepers that have been slightly knocked out of position. That's not too bad. And what I also do just to ensure that the curve remains where I want it, just hammer in a couple of track pins. just to ensure that I keep the curve in place while the glue sets. Okay, so I'll take the camera over now. So the track is now in place. So I'm happy with the spaces between the sleepers, and they're all straight. Perhaps this one could just come out slightly. No, that's looking good. So now I'm just going to put some weights down on the track until the glue sets. Okay, so that's the track now weighted down. So I'll probably keep that overnight to set, and in the meantime I'll start work on this corner now, and we'll start to cover off the super elevation, and then we'll return here in about 24 hours or a few minutes on video to see the track all fixed in place. Okay, so while this track continues to dry, I'm just going to talk you through this curve section here and the super elevation, or Cant as it's often referred to. So you might be wondering why I've got these wide pieces of cork over the already existing 4mm cork bed. That's because obviously 2 years ago when I put the baseboards together and my amateur joinery, the baseboards weren't entirely even in terms of when they transition from one to another. So as you can see underneath, I've tried to smooth it down. I've tried to use filler again just to sort of smooth the transition between the two boards, but I just couldn't get it really as flat as I would have liked. So what I've done here with the cork, same as what I've done in the outer line, is I've just shaved, just using sandpaper, just shaved the top of the cork to make it much more level and take out the slight lump. But there is a bit of a dip as it comes onto the baseboard on the right hand side here, so I've just used various thin layers of cork that I had left over from the previous layout just to ensure that the transition into the curve is smooth. So I've also started, as you can see, the super elevation on the outside edge of the curve, and if I go down to as close to track level as possible, you can see a slight variation in height of the cork, and then as it starts to decrease as it comes into the straight. So this is my first time of attempting super elevation. This is exactly how I applied it on the outside loop, and it's worked to pretty good effect. I say it's not an aggressive cant by any means, but it just does give some evidence of a slight tilt as trains come around the bend and approach into the station. So I'm going to continue on now and just get all these sections glued in place, and then once that's dried I'll carry on laying the track, and then you can get a better look at the super elevation in full effect. Okay, so there it is. The track on this curve is down, say with the super elevation. I'm just going to test with a Mark III coach. You can see there it runs through without any issue. And if I stop it in the middle there, if I put it down to track level, you can just maybe make out, it's difficult to see, I'd say it's only a slight elevation, You can just see the slight tilt there. So it's not aggressive in any way. I certainly didn't want too much elevation. I didn't want to risk any running issues or derailments. So I've simply gone to something that just will represent a slight tilt as it approaches the station platform. So when I have running shots from the platform edge and the approach into the station, we can see, particularly the HSTs, just a slight tilt as it comes in off that bend. That's basically the look that I'm trying to go for. So one thing to point out when doing a curved section like this is the gap between the two tracks. Now you can see I've got my two largest coaches here. These are my coaches from my Class 800, so these are longer than the Mark III coaches. So the distance between this straight section here and this straight section is what's used obviously on the streamline track. I showed you earlier obviously the use of the Pico 6-foot weigh gauge, but as I come onto the curve, you can see the distance gradually starts to widen, and this is just to ensure that when any rolling stock comes right around this curve, even at the tightest section, and you can see there's clear gap and no chance of any rolling stock knocking as they pass each other. Okay, so pretty much working in the same way as I did on the curved sections. I'm now laying the first straight section of track coming through the station. Difference being obviously the straight track is much simpler. It's pretty much, you can put it down as is. So you can see I'm using the glue which is there at the bottom. But what I do with the straight sections, just to ensure, as I say, that they are as straight as possible. So I use the track setter here, which I run along the track to make sure there's no kinks in the track. Also using my Pico 6-foot weigh gauge here, running along both rails, both tracks rather, just to ensure that I'm getting the correct distance. Between both tracks. Okay, so that's the first piece of straight track coming through the station, all glued down. The glue has gone off, and as you can see, it's all nice and secure and in place. Now, at the beginning of this video, the beginning of part 2, I mentioned the reaction that I appeared to be getting from the glue and these nickel silver rails, or as you can see, if I go in close, the same thing has happened. So this can't be down to the temperature, but say because the temperature has been much milder up here in the loft during this section of track laying compared to when I did the outer loop, so it's not related to that. So if anyone can work out as to why I'm getting the reaction here, you know, the discoloration on the rails from using the wood adhesive glue straight down on this cork bed, then I'd be interested to know. As you can see from over here, I'm just using pine, which is resting on the rails and then weighted down. But other than that, nothing sort of out of the ordinary. So it's quite bizarre. It doesn't affect performance in any way, because even the dark tone on the top of the rail, if I use a track rubber, that clears that straight off. So there's no issue there. And when I run the locos on it, again, there's no issue with conductivity. So I guess, looking at it as a positive, I guess it's instant weathering, I guess, on the rails. So no great issue going forward. And so the final thing to show you now in this how I do track laying video is just the use of cosmetic sleepers just to fill the gaps where the sections of track are joined. You can see there you've got the rail joiners, or fish plates as they're also called, between the joins there. If you can see on the outer loop, if I go close, you can see the rail joiners, and then you've got two cosmetic sleepers in its place. So I'll just quickly talk you through that process, and then that should just about conclude the video. Okay, so I have two spare sleepers here, which I've taken obviously from the excess sleepers as a result of the sleeper spacing task at the start of part 1. So all I'm doing now is just taking off that leftover webbing from each rail, from each sleeper. And then what I also do, if you may get on camera there, is where you have the rail clips, the plastic rail clips, is I just, using the craft knife, just literally cut those away to leave a fairly smooth surface. Across the top of the sleepers. So I'll do that on this next one, and then we'll put them in place. Okay, so you join me back at the join now between the two sections of track. So I'm going to put the first sleeper in and just slide it underneath. So the reason I cut away the rail clips is because obviously in most cases you're going to be sliding these sleepers underneath the rail joiners, and of course the rail joiners sit a little bit lower than the rails themselves, so you're just adding obviously an additional obstruction by having the clips on there. So it's easier to just cut the clips away, leaving a nice smooth surface to slide the sleepers into. And then also do my best to get the appropriate spacing. And there we have it. Much better look now. And takes away that ugly looking gap which is left between the two joins. So the final point to make with regards to these cosmetic sleepers is the fact that I don't glue these down in place. I just leave them free for now. I mean, there is enough pressure from obviously the rails above to keep them fairly secure, but at some point of course I'm going to be ballasting this track, so when I put the glue down for the ballast, that will secure those sleepers in place. So that brings to an end this two-part video on how I do track laying. So a lot of content that I've had to go through, but hopefully it's kept you interested throughout. But even if there's just one thing that one of you guys can take from this video and perhaps apply onto your own layout at some point in the future, then I see this video as a great success. So I'm halfway through the track laying on the second loop now, so I will continue on in obviously the same fashion that I have done so far during the recording of this video. And then if you can join me in a couple of weeks, when hopefully my next update video will be out, so I can show you the conclusion. You'll see more trains running on the layout and on the new loop. So until next time, thanks again for watching, and bye for now.